There is a continent on the bottom of your map. It is larger than the United States and Mexico combined. It holds 70% of the fresh water on Earth. And there are stretches of it that you, a private citizen, are forbidden by treaty and by force to fly over, sail into, or photograph from above. Ask yourself a simple question: why does an empty sheet of frozen water need airspace you are not allowed to enter? Why do entire expeditions walk into the white and never walk back out? What follows is a guided descent through Antarctica, beginning with the postcard you have seen and ending at the bottom, 2 miles beneath the ice, with the thing that no government on Earth will put its name to, the surface, the Antarctica they sell you. Every austral summer, more than 100,000 tourists pay to see it. They board ice-strengthened ships in Argentina, cross the Drake Passage, the most violent stretch of open water on the planet, and step out onto the Antarctic Peninsula for a few supervised hours. They photograph penguins, they kayak past blue ice. They are back aboard for dinner. This is the Antarctica of the brochure. It is real, and it is true, and it is roughly the top 1% of the iceberg. At this tier, you have the names you learned in school. Roald Amundsen, who reached the South Pole first in December of 1911. Robert Falcon Scott, who reached it 34 days later, found Amundsen's flag already planted, and died on the walk home with his entire party. Ernest Shackleton, whose ship the Endurance was crushed by pack ice, stranding 28 men on the floes, and who brought every single one of them home alive. These are heroic stories. They are taught as triumphs, but notice what the triumph requires you to ignore. Scott's men starved 11 miles from a supply depot. Their final diary entries describe frostbitten hands too ruined to hold a pencil. The continent did not care that they were heroes. It does not care about anyone. That is the first thing the postcard leaves out. Today, the continent is run by science. Roughly 70 permanent and seasonal research stations, operated by 30 nations, McMurdo the American base, is the largest a small town with a harbor, an airfield, and over 1,000 summer residents. The South Pole itself holds a permanent station that has not been empty for a single day since 1956. This is the surface, penguins, heroes, and laboratories. If you are a normal person, this is where your map of Antarctica ends. What follows is everything below the ice. Tier 2, the lines drawn across the ice that you are not permitted to cross. In 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty. It is on paper one of the most idealistic documents ever written. It froze all territorial claims. It banned military activity. It banned nuclear testing. It set aside an entire continent for peaceful science. It is also the legal instrument by which an entire continent was placed off limits to the public in perpetuity, with no vote from anyone who lives on Earth. 7 nations still hold overlapping territorial claims. Britain, Argentina, and Chile claim the same wedge of the peninsula, 3 flags planted in the same ice. And then there is the slice that no one claims at all. Marie Byrd Land, roughly 600,000 square miles, the single largest piece of unclaimed land on the surface of the planet. No nation wants it on paper. Ask yourself why a place that size, in an age when nations fight over barren rocks in the sea, is one that no government will publicly put its name to. Now, the airspace, Antarctica has no unified air traffic authority, but it is not open sky. Flights over the interior require permits from national programs. Certain sectors around active research operations are restricted, and the magnetic chaos near the poles makes large zones effectively unnavigable by conventional instruments. Compasses spin, GPS degrades, and aircraft are routed around regions that simply do not behave. On the maps that pilots actually use, there are areas marked with warnings and areas left blank, and the blank ones are the ones people talk about. And the satellites, this is the detail that launched 1,000 theories. On the major public mapping platforms, parts of Antarctica render as smeared, pixelated, or blurred. The mainstream explanation is mundane. Low satellite coverage of the poles, the difficulty of imaging a white surface against white cloud, stitching errors where few photographs exist. That is probably the whole truth. But probably the whole truth has never once stopped a blurred patch on a map from becoming the most stared at rectangle on the internet. So already at tier 2, before we have gone anywhere near the fringe, the official record hands you a continent that is claimed by no one in its largest part, flown over by permit only, and rendered incompletely on every map you own. None of that is conspiracy. All of it is documented, and all of it is exactly the soil in which the deeper theories grow. Tier 3. Beneath the ice, there is water that has not seen the sun in 15 million years, and we are only now drilling down to touch it. Antarctica is not a solid block of ice beneath the sheet, kept liquid by the pressure above and the heat of the earth below. There is an entire hidden hydrology, more than 400 subglacial lakes, rivers that flow under the ice, and the largest of them is a body of water the size of Lake Ontario, sealed under more than 2 miles of solid ice in total darkness, in total isolation for millions of years. Its name is Lake Vostok. In 2012, a Russian team at Vostok Station completed a drill that had taken more than 20 years. They bored through nearly 4 kilometers of ice and reached the lake surface. What they pulled up unsettled biologists immediately. The water samples contained DNA traces that did not cleanly match anything in the catalog of known life. One analysis flagged genetic sequences that were simply unclassified, not matching the databases of any organism science had named. The official position was caution. Contamination, possibly. An unknown extremophile, possibly. The phrase that escaped into the press, however, was the one that stuck unidentified. The Russian operation drew a peculiar amount of attention. At the moment the drill neared the lake, the team at Vostok went silent. For 5 days during the Antarctic winter, in 2012, contact with the station was reportedly lost. The team had been pushing toward the breakthrough, and then nothing, no transmissions. A polar research station, swallowed by silence at the exact moment of the most anticipated drilling event in the history of the continent. When contact resumed, the explanation was weather and equipment. The silence is what people remember. Vostok is also where the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was measured, minus 89.2 degrees Celsius, cold enough that exposed skin does not feel pain, it feels nothing because the nerves stop reporting. This is not a hospitable place that happens to hide a lake. This is the single most hostile environment on the planet's surface, and we drilled a hole straight down into the heart of it to touch water that the rest of the world has not contacted since before humans existed. And Vostok is only the most famous one. Lake Vostok, Lake Ellsworth, Lake Whillans, and hundreds more connected by underice rivers into a hidden network that no human eye has ever directly seen. When researchers finally got a camera into one of the smaller sealed lakes, the footage showed fish, living fish, swimming in pitch black water beneath half a mile of ice, in a place where, by every reasonable assumption, nothing should be alive at all. At this tier, Antarctica stops being a landscape, it becomes a lid, and we have only just started lifting it. Tier 4, below the sealed water, the instruments start returning numbers that the scientists who recorded them have struggled for years to explain. Start with the magnetic anomaly. Beneath Wilkes Land in East Antarctica, buried under more than a mile of ice, there is a mass. Satellite gravity surveys detected it, a region where the planet's gravity reads measurably stronger, indicating something enormous and dense seated in the crust. The structure is roughly 300 kilometers across. One leading scientific theory is that it is the buried remnant of an asteroid impact, larger than the one that ended the dinosaurs. A second theory is that it is a natural feature of the deep crust. A third theory, the one the internet prefers, is that we genuinely do not know what is down there, and the people who can see the data are not in a hurry to tell us. Now, the seismic signature. Antarctica is supposed to be tectonically quiet, a frozen sleeping plate, but seismometers across the continent log tremors that do not fit. Repetitive, rhythmic pulses, too regular to be natural earthquakes, originating from deep beneath the sheet. Some have a mechanical periodicity to them. A heartbeat recorded on instruments designed to detect nuclear tests. The accepted explanations involve ice movement, subglacial water flow, the groaning of the sheet under its own weight, but a regular pulse from 2 miles down is the kind of sentence that, once you have heard it, does not leave. Then there is the impossible particle. In Antarctica, there is an experiment called ANITA, a balloon-borne antenna flown high over the ice to detect cosmic particles by the radio flashes they make. ANITA detected something it should never have seen, a high-energy particle that came up out of the ice. Not down from space, up out of the ground, as though it had passed through the entire body of the Earth and emerged from beneath Antarctica, which, according to the standard model of physics, is very nearly impossible. Physicists have proposed exotic explanations: new particles, errors, unknown physics. One paper floated a possibility so strange, it made headlines worldwide, that the signal was evidence of a parallel universe, where the rules run backward. That interpretation is almost certainly wrong, but it was published about Antarctica. By serious people, that is the kind of place this is. And the magnetic chaos itself, the South Magnetic Pole wanders. It is not where the geographic pole is, and it moves every year, dragging the behavior of every compass and navigation system with it. Near it, instruments lie. Aircraft are routed wide. There are sectors where the magnetic field is so distorted that the standard tools of orientation simply stop telling the truth. Combine that with the gravity anomaly, the rhythmic tremors, and the particle that came up from below, and you have a continent where the fundamental forces forces, gravity, magnetism, the physics of matter itself are all behaving in ways the textbooks did not predict. At this tier, the question changes. It is no longer what is hidden on Antarctica. It is what is the ice sitting on top of. Tier 5. This is where the historical record and the forbidden record stop being inseparable. Begin with the one piece of this story that is entirely verifiably true because everything else descends from it. Operation High Jump, 1946. In the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, the United States Navy launched the single largest expedition to Antarctica in history, nearly 5,000 men, 13 ships, and aircraft carrier submarines, dozens of aircraft. Officially, it was a training exercise and a mapping survey, but it was planned for a stay of 8 months, and it withdrew, abruptly after roughly 8 weeks. The man who led it was Admiral Richard Byrd, the most famous polar explorer alive, and upon his return, in an interview that conspiracy researchers have quoted for 70 years, Byrd reportedly warned that the United States would need to take defensive measures against enemy aircraft that could fly from pole to pole. Hostile craft, he was quoted as saying, of fantastic speed. The mission that was supposed to last 8 months came home in 8 weeks, and its commander came home talking about flying objects that could cross the globe. The Navy's explanation was bad weather and equipment loss. The legend was something else. And here, the iceberg pulls in the story it was always going to pull in. Base 211. In the late 1932, Nazi Germany sent an expedition to a region of Antarctica. It named New Swabia, photographing and claiming roughly 600,000 square kilometers of the ice. That much is documented history. The legend that grew around it is not. It holds that the Germans built a hidden base beneath the ice, Base 211, and that at the end of the war, when the regime fell, a number of its highest figures did not die. They sailed south, they vanished into the white, and Operation High Jump, the legend says, was not a survey at all. It was an invasion, and it lost. Now, the historians caution there is no credible evidence of a surviving Nazi base in Antarctica. The submarines that surrendered in Argentina after the war have prosaic explanations. The New Swabia expedition was real, the underground city was not. But notice the shape of the story: a documented German expedition, a documented, abruptly aborted American naval operation. A few years later, a famous admiral talking about hostile aircraft. The folklore did not invent the pieces, it only connected them, and connected dots, in the dark under 2 miles of ice, are very hard to unconnect. And there is the matter of the abandoned stations that are real. Across the continent, there are research bases that were occupied, then deserted, left exactly as they were, swallowed by snow, sealed by cold. Wolf's Fang, old Soviet outposts. Stations buried so deep that crews returning years later had to tunnel down to find the rooftops. Inside, everything is preserved, half-finished meals frozen on tables. Logbooks open to the last entry, bunks made the cold mummifies a place. It does not let it rot. Walk into one of these and you are walking into a moment that simply stopped and waited under the ice for you to find it. At this tier, the line between archive and rumor dissolves completely. Some of these places are real and abandoned. Some are legend. And under 2 miles of ice, in the dark, almost no one can tell you for certain which is which. Tier 6. The discoveries the official record acknowledges, and the ones it acknowledges only sideways. First, the things that are simply astonishingly true. Beneath the ice sheet, ground-penetrating radar has mapped an entire hidden landscape. A canyon longer and deeper than the Grand Canyon, never seen by human eyes. A mountain range the size of the European Alps completely buried. The Gamburtsev Mountains with sharp, jagged peaks that should have been ground flat by ice over millions of years, yet somehow were not. An entire alpine world frozen in the dark, perfectly preserved beneath the white, because the ice that hid it also protected it. And there was life here, real, lush, undeniable life. Fossils prove that Antarctica was once a temperate forest. Dinosaurs walked it, ferns and trees grew across it, rivers ran. In the deep past, this was not a wasteland. It was a green continent, teeming before it drifted south, and the ice came down and sealed everything underneath. Whatever was living here when the cold arrived did not get to leave. It is still down there in the rock under the lid. Now, the discoveries that arrive wrapped in suppression. Every few years, a satellite image circulates showing what observers insist is a structure in the ice. A symmetrical formation near the coast that some call an entrance, a perfectly geometric depression that does not look glacial. a dark rectangular shadow at the foot of a mountain that the moment it goes viral is reportedly scrubbed or blurred on the public maps. The official explanations are always the same: wind, carved ice, a trick of light, an imaging artifact. And maybe they are, but the pattern of it appears, it spreads, it is blurred, has repeated enough times that even the skeptics admit the timing is strange. And then there are the disappearances. Antarctica's history is a quiet ledger of people who walked into the white and were never recovered. Aircraft that vanished from radar over the interior and were never found despite the entire surface being open, flat, and white. Researchers who stepped outside in a whiteout and were gone in the time it took to lose sight of the door. In one documented case, a station's senior scientist was found stabbed to death, allegedly by a colleague who could no longer bear the isolation. The first known murder on the continent, in a place so remote that the law itself barely reaches it. People do not just die in Antarctica. Sometimes they are simply subtracted, no body, no wreck, no explanation. A continent that quietly keeps what it takes. And the visitors, in recent years, the most powerful and secretive people on Earth, have made a strange habit of going there. A sitting United States Secretary of State traveled to Antarctica, a member of a reigning royal family. Religious leaders, billionaires whose names you would recognize. The official reasons are climate research and ceremony. But ask yourself plainly, what draws that particular tier of human being to the coldest, emptiest, most forbidding place on the planet? A place with nothing to see but ice, often and quietly and without explanation. The continent that no one claims, that no one is allowed to fly over, keeps receiving the people who run the world. At this tier, the iceberg stops being a metaphor for hidden knowledge. It becomes a literal description of a place. And the deepest part is still below us. Tier 7, the bottom of the iceberg 2 miles down where the ice meets the rock and the map, makers stop drawing because they no longer know what to draw. At the bottom of every Antarctic iceberg chart, the labels become things no government will confirm and no scientist will sign. We will name them plainly and you will decide where verifiable reality ends and folklore begins. Because down here, the seam between them has frozen shut. First, the melting that is exposing things that should not be exposed. As the ice retreats, it gives back what it took. Perfectly preserved bodies of explorers lost a century ago, surfacing intact. Ancient viruses and bacteria, frozen for tens of thousands of years, thawing back into a world with no immunity to them. Researchers have already revived microbes from deep ice that had been dormant since before human civilization. The lid is lifting on its own now, and nothing on Earth has a defense against what has been waiting under it. Second, the hum. Beyond the rhythmic tremors of Tier 4, observers across the continent have reported a low, persistent sound. A drone felt more than heard coming from deep below, that some recording equipment captures and some does not. The accepted explanation is wind moving across the ice shelves at frequencies below human hearing. A documented phenomenon. But to the people who have stood on the ice in the absolute silence of the polar night and felt the ground itself humming beneath their boots, wind has never been a satisfying word. They describe it the same way again and again, not like weather, like a machine, like something running. Third, the opening. In the oldest and strangest stratum of Antarctic folklore lies the hollow earth, the belief that somewhere in the unmapped interior beyond the magnetic chaos where no instrument can follow, there is an opening that leads down and inward. Admiral Byrd's name is attached to this legend too. A diary, almost certainly fabricated, claims he flew beyond the pole into a warm green land that should not exist. The diary is fake, the hollow earth is not real. And yet, a continent with a vast unclaimed interior, magnetic fields that defy navigation, a famous admiral warning of craft that fly pole to pole, and a region no satellite renders cleanly. The legend did not survive a century because it was true. It survived because the real Antarctica refuses to fully close the door on it. Fourth, and at the absolute base of the chart, the single line that every version ends on. Whatever is under the ice in Wilkes Land, the gravity says there is a mass 300 kilometers across down there. Science calls it an impact crater or a feature of the crust. The bottom of the iceberg calls it the reason for everything above it. The reason for the no-fly zones, the reason for the unclaimed land, the reason the powerful keep visiting, and the reason the maps stay blurred. A single anomaly the size of a small country, sealed under 2 miles of ice, that the people with the data have never fully explained to the people who pay for it. These are not destinations. They are the edge of the map, the point where the people who draw the iceberg admit that what is below is no longer known. And on this continent, more than any other place on the surface of the Earth, they have left the bottom of the page deliberately permanently blank. The continent on the bottom of your map is the largest secret on the surface of the planet, hidden in the most literal way possible. In plain sight, under a sheet of ice, behind a treaty no one alive ever signed. At the surface, you have penguins, heroes, and laboratories. Beneath them, the lines you cannot cross. Beneath those, the sealed water that has not seen the sun in 15 million years. Beneath that, the signals that defy physics, the bases that were erased, and the discoveries that vanish the moment they go viral. And at the very bottom, the anomaly the size of a nation and the open deliberate blank where the map maker stopped. Most of the people you know will never go further than the postcard. A small number have walked down into the deeper tiers, for science, for curiosity, for reasons they were instructed not to name. And the continent itself keeps the rest, quietly, patiently. Under 2 miles of ice, if this descent held you to the bottom, subscribe and follow the channel down. There is another iceberg waiting. There is always another iceberg. The waterline is a choice, what you choose to see and what you choose to leave frozen beneath it.